March is the most unforgiving month in the garden. Plant too late, and you'll miss your entire spring harvest window. These 10 vegetables must go in the ground now, or you'll be buying them at the farmer's market all summer while your beds sit empty. The difference between planting snap peas this week versus mid-April isn't a smaller harvest. It's the difference between sweet, crisp pods and bitter, woody failures. I've planted every one of these crops both on time and late, and I'll show you exactly why the calendar matters more than the weather forecast, plus the specific techniques that turn March plantings into your most productive beds of the year. Snap peas, the cold weather champion. Snap peas laugh at soil temperatures that would kill a tomato seedling. While most gardeners wait for warm spring days to start planting, snap peas are already germinating happily in 45-degree soil, establishing strong root systems before the competition even begins. This isn't just about getting an early start, it's about flavor. Snap peas that mature in cool weather develop higher sugar content and that signature crisp snap, while those planted later in warmer conditions turn starchy and bitter before you've picked half the harvest. The plant itself knows what it prefers, which is why direct sowing beats any indoor starting method. Push seeds 1 inch deep and 2 inches apart along whatever trellis or fence you've got, and they'll figure out the rest. Peas genuinely hate being transplanted, disturb their roots, and they'll sulk for weeks, setting you back further than if you just waited and direct sowed. Here's the bonus most gardeners never realize. Peas are nitrogen fixers, pulling atmospheric nitrogen into root nodules and depositing up to 100 pounds per acre into your soil. That means whatever you plant in that bed after your pea harvest, tomatoes, peppers, squash, gets a preloaded fertility boost without you spreading a single bag of fertilizer. The most common mistake is treating peas like they're delicate and waiting for nice weather in May. By then, you've lost your window. Those May-planted peas will struggle through heat they're not built for, producing tough, woody pods that taste like disappointment. That first snap of pea, eaten straight off the vine in late spring, still cool and sweet with morning dew, is what March planting earns you. Plant them while you're still wearing a jacket, or plan on buying sugar snap peas at premium prices all season while your neighbors pick theirs by the handful. Spinach. Plant now or miss the window. Entirely. Spinach operates on a countdown timer most gardeners don't know exists. The moment temperatures consistently hit 75 degrees Fahrenheit, your spinach plants interpret this as a survival signal and immediately bolt, shooting up a seed stalk and turning every leaf bitter in the process. This makes March your last realistic window for a spring harvest in most growing zones. Wait until April and you're gambling with weather you can't control. The technique itself is almost absurdly simple. Scatter seeds thickly in shallow rows, barely cover them with soil, we're talking a 1/4 inch at most, and keep the bed consistently moist. Once seedlings emerge with their first true leaves, thin them to 3 inches apart, and here's where it gets efficient. Those thinnings aren't waste. Toss them straight into salads. They're tender, mild, and you've just gotten your first harvest while the remaining plants size up. Spinach planted in March can be ready to harvest in as little as 37 days for baby leaves, which means you're eating homegrown greens before most people have even finished planning their garden layout. What really separates homegrown spinach from the grocery store version isn't just freshness, it's that metallic, slightly chemical aftertaste that bagged supermarket spinach develops. That taste doesn't exist in leaves you cut 20 minutes before dinner. The common mistake is underestimating how quickly the window closes. Gardeners in Zone 6 and warmer who plant spinach in late April might get one decent harvest before their plants transform into 3-foot-tall seed stalks seemingly overnight. By then, you're stuck watching perfectly good garden space occupied by plants that are done producing, all because you waited for soil that felt warm enough. Spinach doesn't want warm. It wants cool, moist conditions, and a gardener who understands that some vegetables have hard deadlines. Plant spinach while there's still a chance of frost in the forecast, or accept that you'll be buying those weird plastic clamshells at the store all spring while your garden bed sits empty. Lettuce. Most gardeners plant an entire packet of lettuce seeds in one enthusiastic afternoon, then spend 3 weeks in June desperately trying to give away armloads of bolting heads to increasingly reluctant neighbors. The smarter approach is succession planting, sowing a new short row of lettuce every 2 weeks throughout March. This staggers your harvest, so you're picking exactly what you need when you need it, rather than watching 50 heads mature simultaneously while you're physically incapable of eating that much salad. The technique works because lettuce goes from transplantable seedling to harvestable size in roughly 30 to 50 days, depending on variety, which means your first March planting will be ready in late April, your second planting in early May, and your third in mid-May. You're essentially creating a continuous harvest assembly line instead of a single, overwhelming factory shipment. The method that extends this even further is treating lettuce as a cut-and-come-again crop. Plant loose leaf varieties like black-seeded Simpson or oak leaf, and harvest outer leaves with scissors, leaving the growing center intact. One plant managed this way can produce for 8 to 12 weeks instead of the single harvest you get from pulling the whole head. The outer leaves regrow surprisingly fast when you're not damaging the crown, turning each plant into a small renewable resource rather than a one-time transaction. The productivity difference is substantial. You can feed yourself steady salads from half a dozen plants instead of needing 30 heads all at once. You'll still be cutting fresh lettuce in June while other gardeners are staring at empty beds or bitter seed stalks, wondering why their spring greens had such a short season. The trick is consistency in planting and restraint in harvesting. Treat your March lettuce planting like a factory production schedule rather than a one-time event, and you'll look like someone who actually knows what they're doing while everyone else is buying those sad plastic containers of spring mix that cost $6 and wilt by tomorrow. Radishes. The 25-day miracle crop. Radishes might be the closest thing gardening has to instant gratification. Some varieties mature in just 25 days from seed to harvest, which means you can plant them in early March and be eating crunchy, peppery roots before the month is even over. That speed makes them perfect for impatient gardeners, kids who lose interest faster than weeds grow, and anyone who needs a psychological win while waiting for tomatoes that won't ripen until July. The technique is dead simple. Push seeds half an inch deep into loose soil, space them about an inch apart, and keep the bed moist. They'll germinate in 3 to 5 days if the soil temperature is above 45 degrees, which March typically delivers even in colder zones. You'll know they're ready when the top of the radish pushes up through the soil surface like a tiny bald head. Most varieties are perfect at marble to golf ball size, depending on the type. Beyond their speed, radishes serve a clever secondary purpose that experienced gardeners exploit. They're excellent marker crops. Plant them in the same row as slow-germinating carrots or parsnips, and the radishes will sprout quickly to mark where you planted, preventing you from accidentally hoeing up your carrot row before it emerges. The radish roots also help break up soil crust, making it easier for those slower seeds to push through. Kids genuinely love growing radishes because they can see actual results before their attention span expires, and that early success often hooks them into caring about the garden for the rest of the season. The only real mistake people make is leaving radishes in the ground too long after they've sized up. An extra week or two in warm soil turns them woody, pithy, and unpleasantly hot instead of crisp and mildly spicy. Pull them as soon as they're ready, succession plant a new batch every 10 days through March, and you'll have the earliest harvest in the neighborhood while everyone else is still wondering if their seeds are even alive yet. Carrots. Carrots refuse to be babied indoors and transplanted like tomatoes or peppers. They hate root disturbance so much that attempting to start them in seed trays results in twisted, forked roots that look like something from a horror movie. Direct sowing in March is the only method that works, and the timing matters more than most gardeners realize. Cool spring soil allows carrots to mature slowly in mild weather, which prevents a common problem called splitting, when roots grow too fast in warm conditions and literally crack open in the ground. That slow, steady growth in March-planted carrots also produces sweeter flavor because the plants aren't stressed by heat. The key to success is mixing those maddeningly tiny carrot seeds with sand or used coffee grounds before sowing, which helps you spread them more evenly and avoid the tedious job of thinning hundreds of seedlings packed together like subway commuters. Sow the mixture about a 1/4 inch deep in loose, rock-free soil. Carrots will fork and twist around any obstacle they encounter, including small pebbles or clumps of clay. The waiting period tests patience because carrot seeds take 10 to 14 days to germinate, sometimes longer if the soil dries out even once during that window. Keep the soil consistently moist with light daily watering or a layer of burlap until you see those feathery green shoots. Once they're up, the hardest part begins: thinning. You need to thin ruthlessly to 2 inches apart, even though it feels wasteful to pull perfectly good seedlings. Crowded carrots produce thin, twisted roots instead of the fat, straight specimens you're imagining. Here's something most people don't know. Carrots actually taste sweeter when they're exposed to a light frost because the cold temperature triggers the plant to convert stored starches into sugars as a natural antifreeze mechanism. Pulling your first homegrown carrot genuinely feels like unearthing buried treasure, especially when you discover they have actual carrot flavor instead of tasting like crunchy water. The most common mistake is attempting to grow them in heavy clay soil, which produces forked, stunted roots no matter how carefully you plant. If your soil is heavy or rocky, either grow short varieties like Parisian that only get 2 inches long, or commit to adding enough compost to create a loose 8-inch deep growing zone, anything less, and you're setting yourself up for disappointment when harvest time arrives. Onion sets. Plant the dormant bulbs. Before they wake up. Onion sets look like lifeless brown pellets sitting in bins at the garden center, but they're actually dormant baby onions waiting for the right moment to spring back into action. March is that moment. These small bulbs need to establish their root systems while the soil is still cool, typically between 50 and 60 degrees Fahrenheit, because once summer heat arrives, onions switch from growing bigger to forming their final bulb shape and going dormant again. If you wait until April or May in most zones, you've missed the window for sets to size up properly, and you'll end up with marble-sized onions instead of the baseball-sized bulbs you're expecting. The planting technique couldn't be simpler. Push each set into loose, well-prepared soil until just the papery tip is visible above ground level, spacing them about 4 inches apart in rows. They need full sun, at least 6 hours of direct light daily, or they'll put all their energy into green tops instead of underground bulb development. Here's something that surprises most gardeners. Onions are day-length sensitive crops, meaning they respond to the number of daylight hours rather than just temperature. Long day varieties, which are what you'd plant in northern gardens, require 14 to 16 hours of daylight to trigger bulb formation. That's why timing matters so much. Plant too late, and your onions never get the signal to stop growing leaves and start making the bulb you actually want. Watching those first green shoots emerge from what appears to be a completely dead brown bulb never loses its appeal, even after years of gardening. The shoots push up through the soil within a week or two in most March conditions, and suddenly you've got rows of vibrant green spikes where there was nothing before. The most common mistake is planting sets too deep, burying them completely instead of leaving the tip exposed, or choosing a location with poor drainage. Onions are surprisingly sensitive to wet feet, and if your soil stays soggy, or you plant them in a low spot where water collects, those sets will rot into slimy mush underground before they ever produce a harvest worth eating. Broccoli. Off seedlings for summer heads. March is when broccoli seedlings make the jump from indoor trays to garden soil, and this timing matters more than most gardeners realize. Whether you started seeds indoors 6 to 8 weeks ago or picked up transplants from a local nursery, these young plants need cool weather to establish strong root systems before the real growing begins. Broccoli is a heavy feeder that develops most of its root structure in temperatures between 45 and 65 degrees, which is exactly what March typically provides in most growing zones. Wait until April, and you're asking those plants to establish themselves while temperatures climb, which means they'll rush to produce heads instead of building the foundation they need for a decent harvest. The transplanting technique itself makes a significant difference in how well these seedlings take hold. Choose a cloudy day or wait until evening to minimize transplant shock. Midday sun can wilt tender leaves before roots have a chance to draw moisture from their new location. Plant deep, burying the stem up to the first set of true leaves, which encourages additional root development along the buried portion. Space plants 18 inches apart to give them room to develop those large outer leaves that fuel head formation. Watering with diluted fish emulsion or another gentle fertilizer right after transplanting jumpstarts growth without overwhelming young roots. Here's what most people miss about broccoli. After you cut that main central head, the plant isn't finished. Side shoots will continue forming along the stem for weeks, sometimes months, giving you smaller but perfectly edible florets that many gardeners prefer for their tender texture. The common practice of ripping out the entire plant after harvesting the main head throws away at least half of what you could have eaten. The critical mistake is waiting until April to get those transplants in the ground, especially in regions where temperatures rise quickly in late spring. Broccoli that establishes in warming soil produces those disappointing button heads, tiny, premature crowns that bolt to flower before developing into anything worth harvesting, leaving you wondering why you bothered growing broccoli at all. Kale, the plant that survives your worst gardening. Kale has earned its reputation as the nearly indestructible workhorse of the vegetable garden, tolerating cold soil that would send more delicate greens into shock and actually developing sweeter flavor after exposure to frost. March planting positions you perfectly to harvest tender young leaves throughout spring and early summer, well before flea beetles and cabbage worms discover your garden in the heat of July. The technique itself couldn't be simpler. Direct sow seeds half an inch deep in rows, or transplant seedlings if you're impatient, spacing them 12 inches apart to accommodate their eventual sprawl. The real secret to maximizing kale production lies in the harvest method. Continuously cut outer leaves from the bottom of the plant while leaving the central growing point intact, which signals the plant to keep pushing out new growth from the center. This approach transforms a single kale plant into a living salad bar that produces for 6 to 8 months straight, from spring planting through fall and even into winter in zones where temperatures stay above the low 20s. Research from University Extension Services shows that one well-managed kale plant can yield over 3 pounds of leaves across a season, making it one of the most productive crops relative to garden space occupied. The leaves themselves taste best when harvested young, around 6 to 8 inches long, before they develop that leathery texture and intense bitterness that gives kale its polarizing reputation among people who've only experienced it as overgrown livestock feed. Yes, kale has become somewhat of a trendy vegetable, appearing on every farm-to-table menu and health food blog for the past decade, but that cultural moment happened because the plant legitimately delivers on both ease of cultivation and nutritional density. The most common mistake gardeners make with kale is the same one they make with most greens: letting individual leaves grow too large before harvesting, then wondering why their kale tastes like punishment instead of food. Treat kale like a renewable resource rather than a one-time harvest, cutting young leaves every few days once the plant establishes, and you'll understand why this cold-hardy brassica has fed humans through harsh springs for thousands of years. Beets. Most gardeners treat beets like a single-purpose root crop, completely missing the fact that every beet planting actually gives you 2 separate harvests if you know what you're doing. The first harvest comes early, when you thin those densely clustered seedlings to their proper spacing. Those thinnings aren't garden waste, they're beet greens, which taste remarkably similar to Swiss chard and contain significantly more iron, calcium, and vitamins than the roots most people are actually waiting for. Each beet seed you plant is technically a dried fruit cluster containing 2 to 4 actual seeds, which means you'll get multiple seedlings emerging from every spot you sowed, making aggressive thinning absolutely necessary rather than optional. Plant those clustered seeds about an inch deep in loose, well-draining soil during March, and once the seedlings reach 3 to 4 inches tall, thin them to 3 inches apart, tossing those pulled seedlings directly into your salad bowl or sauté pan rather than the compost pile. The timing matters because beets planted in March mature during cool weather, developing sweet, tender roots before summer heat turns them woody and fibrous with that unpleasant texture that makes people swear they hate beets forever. Research from cold climate agricultural programs demonstrates that beets exposed to consistent temperatures above 75 degrees during their final growth stage develop increased concentrations of geosmin, the organic compound responsible for that polarizing earthy flavor that tastes like dirt to roughly 14% of the population due to genetic variations in odor receptors. Even people who claim to despise beets often change their minds when they taste freshly harvested specimens roasted with olive oil and salt. The earthy flavor remains, but it reads as complex and mineral-rich rather than like eating soil. One critical mistake that stunts beet growth across thousands of home gardens involves soil pH, since beets strongly prefer slightly alkaline conditions between 6.5 and 7.5. And planting them in acidic soil below 6.0 produces stunted roots no bigger than marbles regardless of how long you wait. If your soil tends acidic, work in wood ash or garden lime a few weeks before planting, and you'll pull baseball-sized beets where you previously struggled to grow anything larger than radishes. Swiss chard. The cut and come again powerhouse. Most gardeners treat Swiss chard like a one-and-done crop, planting it in March and then ripping out the entire plant after a single harvest, completely unaware they've just destroyed a vegetable that could have fed them for the next 6 months. Chard handles cold soil better than most greens, tolerates late spring frosts that would devastate lettuce, and then pivots to survive summer heat that sends spinach bolting within days, making it arguably the most versatile leafy green you can grow in a temperate climate. The March planting window allows chard to establish deep roots while the soil remains cool, creating plants resilient enough to produce through temperature swings that kill off more finicky crops. Direct sow seeds 1 inch deep and 6 inches apart in loose, fertile soil, understanding that each wrinkled seed cluster will sprout multiple seedlings that require thinning to prevent overcrowding. Once plants reach 8 to 10 inches tall with stems thick enough to grip, begin harvesting by cutting outer stems at the base with a sharp knife or scissors, always leaving the central growing crown intact and untouched. This cut-and-come-again technique transforms a single planting into a continuous production system, with new leaves emerging from that protected center crown every few days throughout the growing season. Agricultural extension data shows that properly managed chard plants produce over 10 pounds of greens per plant in a single season, making them one of the highest yielding vegetables per square foot in the home garden. The rainbow variety, with its vivid stems in yellow, orange, pink, and red, looks so ornamental that landscape designers regularly incorporate it into decorative borders. Then, homeowners discover they've accidentally planted a food source that's been masquerading as a flower bed all along. The most common mistake involves pulling the entire plant after cutting a few stems. Treating chard like lettuce instead of recognizing it behaves more like a perennial that regenerates from its crown. If you leave that center growing point alone and resist the urge to harvest it down to a stub, a single March planting will still be feeding you in October, long after your neighbors have moved on to buying grocery store greens that taste like the plastic clamshell they came in. March isn't just another month on the calendar. It's the narrow window when cool season crops either get planted or get missed entirely. And the difference between acting now and waiting another week is the difference between abundance and buying vegetables you could have grown yourself. These 10 crops don't need perfect conditions or expert skills. They need soil that's thawed, a gardener who's willing to work in weather that isn't quite comfortable yet, and the recognition that the best harvests don't come from ideal timing. They come from good enough timing acted upon instead of perfect timing that never arrives. Plant something today, even if it's just one row of snap peas, because the only March planting you'll regret is the one you didn't make.